Magic Talk with Chris Lynch. Waitangi Day is nearly here. Plenty of people will be heading out, doing their own thing, heading to the beach. What is Dame Tariana Turia doing? Let's find out. Good morning to you, and thanks so much for your time this morning.
How are you? I'm very well, thank you.
Nice to speak with you. What does Waitangi mean to you?
I think that the reason that it came about was to try and bring peoples together and for Māori people to share this land with others. So that's what it means to me.
Do you think in 2022 we are achieving that, or have we got a lot of work to do?
I think we've still got a lot of work to do, Chris. It's generally Māori things are sort of tacked on to other things, and I don't think that people have generally understood the whole concept of Waitangi Day and why it's here and why it's celebrated. I think they take for granted their place in this land and don't give consideration to the fact that others had to be displaced for them to be here.
Do you think that mindset will ever change?
Well, I suppose I'm not terribly hopeful. We're at year 2022. I think that there's an attitude here in Aotearoa which kind of implies that Māori are secondary to the mainstream.
How do you think we can change that then? What would give you hope?
Right, well, I've probably given up on the hope, but I think that we have to have a genuine understanding of when people came into this country and why the treaty was put in place. And I don't believe there is that understanding. I mean, I listened to some of the talkback shows, and there are many people who don't believe that we have any rights here in Aotearoa. So I feel quite sad, really, that they've been able to carry this misconception into this period of our lives.
Particularly in 2022, you would hope that things would change. I want to ask you this question, and I read it in a recent blog, and you were quoted as saying, and it's quite a powerful quote, and I wondered if you've changed your attitude since then, and that is, you've been recognised that focusing, and I think you may have said this, focusing only on adversity and disadvantage runs the risk of creating an attitude and a perception of incapacity which needs to change to confidence and determination to succeed. Do you think that Māori are finally being able to determine their own future with confidence now, as opposed to, I suppose, some of the patronising messages they may have once got in the past?
I think those patronising messages are still there, sadly. And, we're always conscious of the fact that others determine our lives for us. So we have governments that are made up of many people. Often Māori are in the minority. In fact, they are always in the minority in those governments. I think that our ability to determine our own way forward is always fraught.
Is that changing, though, with the likes of the Māori caucus inside Labour?
Well, they are Labour. They're not there as Māori. They are Labour.
What's the difference?
What's the difference? I think there's a big difference. I was in Labour too, but I can tell you that it was very clear to me, and I remember being challenged, in fact, by one of the caucus to say to me that I never ever talked about Labour, that I only ever talked about Māori. And I found that really quite interesting, because it was the fact that I was Māori and that I was asked to go into Labour. And I think that was in the hope that I could possibly influence our people. I think we need to understand that the system isn't Māori at all. And so if you go into Parliament, you are agreeing to go into a system that is modelled on England, actually. It's not our system.
How do you rate, or what are your views of the current Māori Party inside Parliament? They're certainly making noise. They certainly grab the headlines. Are they a force for good, or do you worry that sometimes they might be seen as a sideshow with the way they're perceived in the media?
Well, I think that when you're in Parliament, you've got to be very, very mindful of what the public perception of you is. And I think that just being two of them in there, they may feel that this is how they get noticed. Personally, I don't necessarily agree with it. I think that you're there to serve the people, to do the very best that you can in their interests, and to try and work constructively with who the government is. And it's one of the reasons why the Māori Party chose to work with National. We knew that there were things in Parliament that we couldn't change, that we couldn't make any headway in, and the only way that we could do that was to align ourselves with the government. And our president of that time, who was Matua Whatarangi Winiata, made it very clear to us that it didn't matter who the government was. Our responsibility was to do the very best that we could for our people with whomever.
It doesn't seem all that long ago that there was that relationship, but if you look towards where we're at now in 2022, I could not possibly imagine, if I'm being honest with you, the National Party working cooperatively with the Māori Party.
So I think when you're in politics, there is no doubt in my mind that people behave politically and they don't necessarily act in the interests of anyone other than maintaining their position in Parliament. And I think that's sad. People need honesty, they need leadership that is about binding people together in this country. And that's not what I'm seeing.
Well, I want to pick you up on that because that's an important observation you make. And I want to ask you this question. I mean, the government would argue it is doing a lot for Māori with its agenda to have, separate identities for Māori and the rest of the population. Do you ever worry that their well-meaning intention of perhaps progress could actually do the reverse and hinder race relations?
Well, I think it's really important for us to understand that we do live in a country that is made up of many ethnicities. And while I totally expect that Māori people will be respected as First Peoples of this land, I don't think that the way in which they are acknowledged or the way in which they're treated is appropriate. And if I take, for instance, Kohanga Reo, it was something that was determined by our people for 5 years. Our people worked for nothing in Kohanga Reo, and today they get resources, but they are dancing to someone else's tune. So now they're part of Ministry of Ed. The Ministry of Ed is not a kaupapa Māori organisation, and I think that it hinders the progress of how Kohanga Reo could be and could have been.
How will you spend Waitangi Day? What will you do?
How will I spend it?
Yeah.
I will spend it with my family. There was a time where I used to go up to Waitangi, but mainly I think because I was in politics and it was expected. But to be honest with you, the most important job that I have now is to ensure that my children and my grandchildren and great-grandchildren understand their place in the scheme of things and how important it is for them to uphold the essence of who they are at all times. So I will just spend my day with my children and my grandchildren and great-grandchildren and enjoy the time with them. I don't know whether we'll be celebrating anything, but what we will be celebrating is the essence of who we are and the tupuna who we come from.
Do you miss Parliament?
No. No, I definitely don't. It's been one of the most difficult environments that I've ever been in. I had things happen to me when I was in Parliament. I just couldn't believe that it was happening. And quite often I said things which really upset people. And so, my family paid for it. Yeah.
You're very respected on both the left and the right of the political spectrum. And I wonder whether that comes as a great surprise to you.
Yeah, well, it probably does. It probably does. It's quite interesting. I remember I had an aunt who was in Parliament, Iriaka Ratana, and she told me that many of the developments that took place out in the Ratana Pa, for instance, happened with the support of the National Party. And that's been an interesting thing for me because it was through John Key, in fact, that we were able to get many of the houses out in Ratana renovated, put heating in, new roofs, and also the development of the community at large. And we could never ever seem to get those things through Labour, and yet the people out there have been intensely loyal to Labour. They have been amazing. And I think it was because of the relationship that Tahupōtiki Wiremu had with the Labour movement, but he was no fool. And there's no way that he would have just continued to support them willy-nilly if they weren't prepared to make the changes that he would have expected.
How do you rate the current race relations in New Zealand today under Jacinda Ardern's leadership?
Well, I suppose if I'm being really honest, I don't rate Jacinda Ardern. I think that our people, we want to stand on our own 2 feet. That's what we should be building, is that capability and capacity in the people to really stand on their own 2 feet. And that's the kind of leadership that we need. We don't need them to be beholden to anybody else other than themselves. And I always recall back in the days when we were rebuilding our marae that one of my children said to me one day that there were times when he felt like shutting the marae gateway and never having to leave or never letting anybody in because of the way in which our people had to change. And I think that was really pertinent at the time. And there are still times today when I feel that we have to give up so much to participate or to be part of that I don't wonder, well, I wonder in actual fact whether it's been any good for us.
In what respect?
I'll use kōhanga-reo, our kōhanga-reo on our marae as an example. I look at that group of children. We have 37 children there daily. We're not allowed to have any more because you're bound by the rules and regulations of the Ministry of Ed. But in actual fact, we probably could have another 20. But I think that the problem is there's always another master.
Right.
And that makes it, I think that makes it significantly difficult when you're dancing to somebody else's tune to try and fit someone's paradigm of how or what you should be. And I'm just at the end, I suppose, getting to the end stage of my life. And I would have liked to think that at this time that I could look at my great-grandchildren and know that we are leaving them in a better place. And I don't believe that now.
Interesting thoughts. As always, I really enjoy the considered conversations we have, and I really appreciate your time this morning, and thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you.
Dame Tariana Turia, everybody. This is Magic Talk.